Thank you so much. Oops. Just get it back to the beginning. All right. I have a lot of notes on you. All right, so Brooke is the digital marketing manager at Brookdale, and they have 700 senior communities. So a lot of properties, as I said, 2 distinct audiences, and so that entails a lot of different, workings. So let's first just talk about your role there at Brookdale and just what you're tasked with in terms of reaching these audiences.
Yeah, so I am the digital marketing manager at Brookdale, and I am the channel leader for paid search and our programmatic initiatives. So both over the search and then the video and display ads on programmatic. And yeah, there are a lot of challenges in that, having all of the locations, first of all, and then also having those 2 distinct audiences that are very different, being the sandwich generation, someone like me who has, aging parents and family at home to take care of, as well as we want to talk to the prospects, the people who are going to potentially move in with us.
So, all right, you need to obviously figure out the different audiences. So start with, before we get into the campaigns you're creating, how do you then determine? I mean, we have very limited data nowadays. So how are you collecting the data to know what each audience is doing, what you need from them, and then just being able to create these messages that are very personalized to each of them?
Yeah, so it's exciting because we're always trying new things, and of course with privacy regulations as well, we're limited. We're kind of in between 2 different categories of like housing and healthcare, so there's a lot of regulations there. One of the slides that was up earlier, those are the channels that we use to collect data, of course, and then through interactions that our prospects have with us on our channels is another way.
Well, and as far as, are you doing, again, you mentioned when you're talking medical or anything, that kind of, you can't use that information. So what is your way of getting that first-party data? Because I think that seems to be the crux of when you are starting to create that different messaging and that different content.
Yeah, through interactions on our website, just anything, upper funnel, lower funnel, a lot of different touch points that we're able to collect that information.
Okay, now you also offer, just to give everyone a better idea, you offer different lines of service. So not only do you have 2 distinct audiences, you have 3 different lines of services. You have memory care, independent care, and assisted living?
Yes.
Okay, so, or independent living and assisted living. So obviously you are reaching all of them, but how much does the messaging, are you able to incorporate any of that to make it work, or is it very separate? You channel this, and what channels are working for each of the different target audiences?
Yeah, that's a lot of what we do is testing those different lines of service, and each line of service also plays differently with the different audiences that we have. So for instance, independent living, obviously that's going to be more the prospect, they're searching for themselves, whereas memory care assisted living is going to be more the caregiver, the influencer. So we're able to take those audiences and the channel that we look at most for obviously for performance is search ads, and so we use a lot of different tests to make sure that the content is directed to the person that is supposed to be seeing that ad, but also through all of the different
In terms of the channel, what is specific to each person?
Yes. So, and then also through the different, the various lines of service, looking at the return on ad spend for each of those, because that's very important. We're going to have a different one for each line of service.
Well, first, I guess let's go into what are your KPIs? Now, is it the same for each, or is that different as well?
Yeah, so the KPIs vary as well, depending on the channel that we're in, of course, but the main one that we're focused on is move-ins, because that gives us the best opportunity to serve those who live with us. So We look at move-ins, and then we also look at quality leads.
And I know you've been doing a lot of testing. So what are you finding that, so, and again, getting back to the initial dilemma or challenge in terms of creating that one ad and maybe just tweaking it, but still being able to, what are you finding with your testing that's working the best? And then how are you able to make it work for both audiences?
It mainly has to do with the return on ad spend and looking at the value of each action that the user takes. So the different, whether it's a move-in or inquiry, and assigning a different value to each of those for each line of service, and then again for each customer audience.
So is there a channel you're finding that's working better than others?
For that is just search and various search platforms.
Are you using social media at all, or any other channels that are be able to create where you can reach more people in the sense of where they're at? You know, because that, of course, you know, especially when you're talking maybe the caregivers, they might be a group that tends to go to social media to interact anyway, and then you can reach them there.
Absolutely. So, good point. That's another way that we're able to collect that data is through our social channels, and also through all of our programmatic campaigns, and really looking at where they are. So Pinterest is a big one. Our audience is into, does really well. Facebook, and then for me, I love doing video a lot, and CTV specifically, and we're able to do a lot there with the, we were talking about what the two different audiences, how you talk to them. On one hand, we want to assure the caregiver that we're going to take care of your parent, and this is a great, safe place for them, but then we want to tell the prospect that this is a fun place to live and all your needs are going to be taken care of, and yes, you can bring your dog and live with us. So that always does really well to drive those upper funnel conversions that we look at down to that end KPI of a move-in.
Well, and also in terms of, like you said, seeing the dog, or Pinterest, I'm assuming, because it's designed in terms of where people are living.
Yes.
I would think that would be a lot of. So when you're seeing that resonate and you're seeing it on these different channels, like how are you tracking that to know, then bring it back to really be able to fine-tune your creative?
We look a lot at our MTA model, and especially with our stakeholders, very finance driven. We want to look at those real world, like tie it back to a business case of this, we're generating this many leads for the business. So I like to look at the time it takes to move in, because it's a very long considered process for us. So the time to move in is important, and of course the amount of move-ins. So we look at the part that each channel plays into driving that move-in, because search is, for a lot of people, the way that you generate the most conversions. But if we're able to say email helped to engage these users so that they moved in X times faster, that's really valuable to our KPIs as well.
Wait, so you talked about move-in as being the main KPI, but also when you hear a lot, I mean, maybe not so much the clicking, but just getting on the site, because it is a long process. It's not just someone, buys it immediately. There is time that it takes. They see it, they have to check it out. So is there other KPIs that you are looking at as well, or does it make sense just to look for that final conversion, that move-in?
So there's a lot that goes into the process of moving into a location. So there are a lot of touch points along the way that we do look at. Initially, of course, we're looking at if they visited a community. For me in marketing, my last touch is the visit. I can't, or the visit schedule. I can't make someone go to the community and take a visit. I can't make them move in. So I look at all of them along the way, and then also that helps inform the rest of our strategy as far as the messaging that they would see before a move-in or after a visit would change before and after the visit.
And in terms of reaching people, you talked about you collecting data on your site and asking questions, but also, are you taking maybe data from the people who are actually moving in? Because I'm assuming there you would get a lot more information once they move in. You find out more about them, their lifestyles, what they like to do. Are you able to leverage that in order to then create even more targeted media?
Yeah, so currently, again, with it being healthcare, we can't take a lot of that information. And also, I think our data strategy as it evolves over time hasn't taken that into account so far. However, that is an initiative that I'm really excited about, because I also, as a marketer, just get really excited about learning things about people. And so we find that, book club is a really important part of a lot of people's lives at our communities, or, travel, woodworking, record collecting. There are all of these things that they're interested in. So we are moving that direction. And just as an initial kind of test, Jeff is here. He's awesome. He's our SEO guy. And so they did some really good organic content around pets. And I mentioned that earlier. That's a really big issue for people. They don't want to leave if they can't take their cat or their dog. So we were able to capitalize off the finding that he found that people are more likely to convert if they come off of this pet page, and run a campaign with that information in the ad copy, and then in video and in display, feature that you can have your pet here, and that really helps. So I'm looking forward to testing that with more interests of our residents.
And so just in terms of, so we sort of kicked it off how you're able to reach two different audiences with that one targeted ad, or maybe not, as I said, maybe there's some tweaking along the way. Mm-hmm. Was there an audience that sort of jumped out, that maybe that's where the focus was, and then you tweaked it for the other audience, or how did that become where you were able to, because as you said, you have a very limited budget, so you need to kind of combine the two in some way?
Yeah, there's usually a line of service that really takes off in these tests. And so for this one where we were looking specifically at return on ad spend, our independent living jumped out ahead. And that was kind of surprising, because historically we skew towards the influencer. So we were able to lean in there and really focus more on the conversation with the prospect themselves.
And so then taking that, but then you also have to still keep the influencer in mind. Was it about tweaking creative, tweaking messaging, channels? What needed to change a little bit without that much more investment?
Yeah, so the responsive search ads are huge. And then also our creative team did develop 2 sets of creative that very similar, but instead of saying, you move in here, would say, we'll take care of your loved one. So very similar approach, not a lot of, you're not starting from scratch. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, like if you say you want this and they want that, or I want, they want, we want the same thing, we're gonna call it something different. So the keywords would change a little bit, where Mom would search for what, do you have a knitting circle at Brookdale? I would search more for like activities at a senior living community, so it wouldn't be as specific. So we tweak the keywords a little bit, and we tweak the creative a little bit.
Great. And so, okay, now I mentioned up top that you have 700 communities, and you talked about, when you were explaining things, about your shareholders and having to answer to them or keep them in line with what your strategy is. So talk about that after, when you first were launching this, or when you were this campaign. What were the results? What were you seeing from the shareholders, and how did you then have to respond to that?
Absolutely. So you always have to look at the business needs, and it's really easy to, when you're sitting there running a campaign, say, our results are really good in XYZ market, and we want to just optimize to that. Whereas the business sees that we need more lead volume in this other location. And so instead of fighting over that, because it is a resource, that money there that you want to get the most for your money. And so it's almost an exercise in letting it happen, I guess, just to say, okay, we tested it your way, and it wasn't bad, but it didn't yield the same results. So I would take that budget and split it and do it my way, do it their way, and then show the results, and then ultimately bring it back to where we will target what is the most beneficial for the business.
And by that, you mean the markets that we're actually seeing the most business? Because, I mean, I think when we spoke, you mentioned Florida, which is a huge market, but it's so saturated with seniors, so there's so many other competitors there. So maybe that's not the market to mostly invest in. So how are you, when you're talking to the shareholders and you're sort of showing them, I get what you're saying, be nice, don't tell them they're wrong, but let them know that there's other ways to do it. Ultimately, what was the final result? Like, what did you sort of come to an agreement on? And I know it was obviously based on what you were finding the most success in terms of your ROAS.
Mm-hmm. So with this test, we generated 27% more leads year over year. And then we also, our cost per lead dropped by 3.5%. So we were able to be more efficient by really focusing in on where those leads that we were generating were able to convert for the business. So working hand in hand with the finance department and operations to say, this is what we're seeing, and we can produce these prospects if you can schedule a visit, answer the phone, those kinds of things, and then close the leads. And so making it a holistic approach and really letting them know that we have the whole business in mind and not just our KPIs really went a long way.
All right, and so I want to just sort of wrap it up here, but in the sense of, I know that right now we're talking corporate. This is very much, looking at the whole brand holistically. But all these 700 units or communities, thank you. Is that something down the line where you're going to see that happening in terms of, okay, maybe they can have their own marketing budget, and how will that not be wasted? Is that happening now? Is some of what they're marketing locally are you doubling up? So what's the plan there?
Yeah, I'm super excited about that question, actually. Sarah's here. She's our specialist, and she is actually going to be running, we're in the planning phases now of what we're calling, and I'm sure is not a new thing, hyper-local campaigns. And so what we're going to be doing is focusing in on those communities who need a little bit of extra help with leads, but have a super good conversion rate. And so we want to run localized ads, and so it's a work in progress, but we're using some responsive ads and things like that to generate a local point of interest or something that will really engage the customer at a local level. So if I'm searching for Brookdale Green Hills, I'm not going to get sent to Brookdale Goodlettsville. And so anyway, that's really exciting. That's our next phase, and taking the learnings so we don't double dip or overlap with what we're currently doing, taking those learnings, making best practices for what we're about to launch, and then really nailing down the KPIs, since this campaign, it won't be search, so just making sure that we understand what our goal is with that in driving conversions.
All right, well, does anyone have questions for Bliss? This is great. You didn't get into, which I thought was interesting, in terms of when you are going more localized, and you talked about the overlap, but are you going to work hand in hand? Is it going to be answering to the corporate? Is there going to be that where everyone, even though they're individual and they all have different, as you said, different points of interest in that area, at the same point, is there any overhead there where they're going to have to answer to corporate, or so that way you don't waste those dollars?
Right, so we'll be running it corporately, so the individual community won't have to answer for any of that. They will tell us what they want to do, and then we'll execute it, and we'll report on it, and we'll run it on our end, and we'll be ultimately responsible for that. And then they do other campaigns, grassroots, of course, and so we want to make sure that it aligns with what they're doing. So we're very close with our field marketing team to make sure that we are keeping their best interest in mind and making sure that doesn't get lost in our corporate initiatives.
Got it. All right, well, Bliss, thank you so much. Everyone give her
Thank
a round of
you.
applause.